It does?
It needs to be goosed up quite a bit. It's not
Oh, turn it off. How about now? So say better?
keep up.
Yes, no, and so we're good. Yeah, okay, good. Thumbs up. So we're going to go ahead and proceed. So, my name is Jack Ward. I am the vice chairman of the steering committee, as Jack mentioned. I've been using various flavors of Unix for 20 years or so now, and throughout that time, I've enjoyed enhancing my shell and using it as a tool rather than just a means to an end. And so I find that when I'm working with other people in my at work or at home, I see a lot of people just repeating things that they do on the shell in inefficient manners, or they'll watch something I'm doing and the jaw is dropped and it's like, well, yeah, you just do this and it's okay. And so I think that there's a lot of power to be unlocked in the shell that most people, I don't think, take advantage of. So I just wanted to highlight, for one thing, one thing I wanted to highlight was a couple of commands that I see people using, but not their full effect. Obviously, I can't get into a great deal of depth in the time that we have, but there's a couple of commands that I think, if you learn just a little bit more about, you can really get a lot of mileage out of them. And then after that, we're going to go into some of the features of the shell itself. Some of the things that you can do with it to make your day-to-day working and playing on your Linux box that much more enjoyable and easy. And so, without further ado, let's get into it. So first thing we're going to do is start getting into some commands that are available. So at the end of the day, the shell is executing commands that are available on the system. So, good place to start is command fish. Command pages. So, first of all, if you don't know anything about command pages, it would be a good idea to just look at command page itself. Command page. Learn about the sections and the options that are available to help you learn or go deeper into your knowledge of the shell. The bash man page is actually a tremendous resource. It's extensive and voluminous, but you can take just a section of it and read it and kind of get it, just drill down into one particular aspect or another and really enhance your usage experience. And then there's the apropos command. And the apropos, anybody not familiar with the apropos command? Okay, excellent. All right, so the apropos command basically searches the short description of man pages and shows you the list of man pages that are related to that topic. Now, this is not a semantic search or anything fancy like this. You're searching for a keyword. But it's a really good starting point. So if you do apropos bash, you'll come up with the bash man page, obviously, but then you'll also come up with some other things that perhaps you wouldn't have known to look at.
I have a question. How close is that to the old Bermuda index from the old BS3 numbers?
I don't know. I'm not sure what the, I'm not familiar with the, so the question was, how close was it to the, what index was it?
Bermuda index.
Bermuda index for the BSD manuals. I use BSD, but not enough to be familiar with that index. So I'm not sure.
Dating myself.
Was that? Yeah.
Question.
So yes.
When I said apropos bash, it said bash, nothing appropriate.
So there's also, I believe it's make what is. I'm not sure what the I don't know off the top of my head what it is, but there's a command to rebuild the index of the apropos index, as it were. So we can circle back afterwards.
Don't forget info flow.
I do tend to forget info as much as humanly possible. There is, as he was pointing out, there's also info, which is the GNU hypertext index documentation. It exists. I try not to use it as much as possible. That's just me. So anyway, one thing that you do see commonly in Linux and Unix is you see the numbers appended to the command. What those actually refer to is the section of the manual where you'll find it. So section 1 is user commands, and for example, section 3 is libraries. So we've got, for example, there's a command line utility called printf, which maps pretty closely to the printf function. But if you just do man printf, you're going to get the user command. If you want to know the API for C's standard library function, you would do man3 printf. Different systems do different ways. So in sysb, it's typically man minus s 3 and whatnot. Again, man is your friend. But basically, that's another thing I was referring to when I talked about the man pages. It kind of goes through what the sections are. And a couple of people, by the way, have already taken advantage of this, but please ask questions as we go along. If I bring up something that you're wondering about, by all means. If we get to the point where I think we're running short on time, we'll save the rest of them to the end, but otherwise, please feel free to raise your hand. All right, the next one I want to get into is grep. Judging from a lot of the technical interviews I've given, there's not a lot of understanding of what this command does. I've heard some amazing properties be attributed to the grep command. It searches for a regular expression in a file or a string if you type to it. For the record, we are not going into regular expressions right now, so that's off the table. However, if given a regular expression, you can search for it in a file name. So the basic usage is just grep pattern file name. If you want to reverse that, if you want to search for the lines where the pattern does not occur, you do grep minus v. No, I do not know what the v stands for.
Invert.
What's that?
Invert.
Invert. Okay, now I know what the v stands for. Thank you. There's a grep minus r, which I used many times today, as a matter of fact. If you're in a directory, you want to know where, like you're in a directory full of source code, you want to know where a certain function is called, grep minus r function name, and it will search all of the files in under the current directory for that pattern. Yes?
I would add for grep-r, especially if you're searching through a lot of stuff or a lot of big files, grep-rn is amazing because it gives you the line number too.
Good point. So grep we'll get into the end in just a second, and I will bring you to that. Thank you. Okay. So the other one is grep case insensitively. So if you're looking for foobar, if you do grep minus I foobar, then the F's and F's, all the letters can be uppercase or lowercase. To his comment, grep minus n tells you what line numbers where a pattern occurs. So grep minus rn, for example, would tell you it would search recursively for a pattern in a given directory, show you the names of the files and the line number on which they occurred. So very useful few commands there. Grep minus c is also useful. It gives you a count of the times that a pattern, or the count of the lines on which a pattern occurs. So if you've got foo on a line and you grep minus c foo, that only returns one because it's counting the lines, not instances of the pattern. So you can put these together, as he was mentioning, like grep minus rn, grep minus rc. I'll use that, for example, sometimes, and then pipe that to grep out files that have no occurrences, grep :0, for example, so that I can just get a list of the files that actually have the pattern I'm looking for in a large directory. There's a couple of other interesting ones that can help you when you're trying to find more information than is just with the pattern. So for example, going back to the function name example, perhaps you have a standard boilerplate commentary that always precedes the definition of a function. You could grep for the pattern that matches the definition of the function with minus b, and it'll give you a certain number of however many lines you think is necessary above to get that comment in there, and it will give you that many lines before the pattern that you're matching.
Minus A likewise gives you that number of lines after the pattern that you're matching. And minus C is context, which is before and after. There are also a couple of useful sibling programs. FGREP, searches, I'm sorry, was it?
No, I was just gonna make a comment, just wanted everyone to be aware, grep is a utility, so it's actually not just bash, but it looks at all these.
Yes, yes. So his point is that grep is a utility, not a bash function. And yes, thank you. We haven't gotten into the bash specific things yet. This is, as I said, bash is you use it to execute the utilities and commands on the system. And these are there's a couple of, just 2 or 3 commands that I've seen people using that they don't use to their full extent. And so that's why I just wanted to point out some of the additional options that are available on some of those that are commonly used. So, but thank you, yes. So FGREP searches for a fixed string. To be honest with you, most of the time I'm using this, I use it to do things like searching through a very large Apache access log or something like that. If I'm looking for an IP address, 1.2.3.4, dot is a meta character in a regular expression, and if I don't, I'm either going to have to escape those dots to get exactly 1.2.3.4, or I could match a lot of stuff that I don't want to, especially in a very large file. So FGREP just basically turns off the regular expressions, and whatever you're searching for is search for literally. EGREP is for extended regular expressions. Again, we're not going into regular expressions here, but there's a couple of different modifiers and atomic operators that you can use in an extended regular expression that you can't in a regular one. These are also available if you just do grep minus F, grep minus F on the first one, or grep minus E on the second one. So, but they exist as separate utilities. All right, question on the grep family. I know I flew through that.
Question, but for the option for fixed or extended capitals.
Okay. The point he was making is that the options to grep for the fixed and extended are the capital letters, not lowercase letters.
Also, you mentioned that looking for files with the matches, the -L option that just lists the files that have matches. Capital L lists files that don't have a match.
Excellent. Okay, so the 2 more options, minus lowercase l and minus capital L, which match, show files that do match the expression and don't match the expression, respectively. Thank you.
When using a recursive grep, especially in code with source and binaries, you might want to use the capital I, which ignores binary files.
Another good option, capital I ignores binary files, useful in a directory where you might have created binaries.
-S will suppress error messages.
This time.
-S,
-S will suppress error messages.
in which if you're going through other files that are different file types, you don't care about them.
Okay. Okay, great.
I'd just like to see the prior slide again.
Sure.
Thanks.
Yeah, I keep forgetting that too, guys.
All right. Anybody else? All right. That's good. All right. All right. The next one that I don't see people using to its full extent is find. Find, much as the name implies, looks for a file in a directory. It's the basic usage of it. And the basic usage is find some directory name minus name something. So you're just looking for something with something in its name in that directory. You can also search for, yes?
I'm not sure where it's appropriate, but somewhere along the line, you should at least point out the difference between a glob like this and a regular expression.
Okay.
And just knowing that there is a difference is half the problem.
Fair enough. Okay, so his point was that I should point out the difference between a glob and a regular expression. That's a good point. So a regular expression is more complicated than a glob. We'll start with that. It's generally more descriptive, and I'm going to steer away from an explicit definition of it. A glob is a lot simpler beast, although it's related to it. The star in a glob simply refers to 0 or more characters, whereas in a regular expression, it's actually the star alone is meaningless. It has to modify something. In a glob, you can also do things like basic character classes, a few alternations. It's basically an expression which is designed to match a file name for the most part. It doesn't have to be used that way. That it's used in other libraries or used in libraries for other purposes. But that was, I think, the initial reason behind it. Find uses globs. It does not use regular expressions. So if you put in .star something .star, find will look for something with a literal dot, any number of characters, something, a literal dot, and then any number of characters. So versus in a regular expression, .star something .star is 0 more characters, something, 0 more characters. So good point. Thank you, yeah. I think, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you can do man glob or man pattern to get that.
Bash.
What's that?
Bash.
And bash, yeah, okay.
That brings up another point too, if you just, at any time, here you're quoting out the glob, send it to the find command. And you might want, we're gonna talk about the single quote, double quotes.
Good point, okay, thank you.
But what I was gonna say is, the bash itself globs and not,
Yes,
in terms of
That's
what it
actually
really
why.
sends to the utility.
right. Excellent point. Okay, so what he's pointing out is the star something star is in single quotes here, and the reason for that is when you're running a command from the command line, bash is the first thing that gets a hold of the string that you just typed in. Bash knows about globs. Bash is going to try to expand that glob. It's going to expand it into whatever it is, and then it's going to pass whatever it found back into find. I believe that if it doesn't find something in the current directory with something in its name, it will just patch the literal glob. But
Now, there are options to control that.
read mandate.
What this is a form of escape, and there's different ways to escape.
Exactly. So this basically means tells bash, I mean the literal string star something star should be passed to the find command. Don't try to interpret this, just pass it as is in, and then find will interpret the glob and do what it's supposed to do.
The difference between single quotes and double quotes is double quotes, bash will actually still try to expand any variables that might be inside the double quotes. Single quotes will even pass the variable expression like $ variable name as $ variable name to
Okay. Yeah, so
Also, the handling of backslashes is different between.
yeah, we can get into
Yes.
we can pretty much go down the fractal path of different ways, different things that we can go in there. So let's go ahead and move on. All right, so the next thing that I find handy is finding files of a certain size. It is powers of 2, not powers of 10, so 2M is 2 megabytes, not megabytes. I find that obviously for for when a disk is filling up, that comes in really handy. You can also tack them together with minus A, minus O. You can negate all this other stuff. Again, for the exact syntax, I recommend the man page, but know that it's there. So we can find something that is named a certain thing and is over a certain size. We can also find something modified within a certain amount of time. So something within the last day, useful when you're trying to answer the question, what just changed on the system? Which is another one with the minus newer down below, and I'll double back in just a second, but minus newer can compare to a file. So if you know something happened since this particular file was modified or something like that, you can look for that. What's that?
You could touch a file and then run a command and then say find whatever's new.
Yes, you can touch a file. Good point. So his point is you can also touch a file with a certain modified date and then run that on a newer, so you can compare it to a certain date. The more than a day ago requires a little bit of explanation. When find is looking for end times, it's looking for whole numbers of days. Okay, so -1 is pretty obvious, less than 1 day, which means that when it takes the number of seconds mod 86400, it gets less than 1. The +0 means anything
Say that again.
greater. What's that?
Say that again.
Less than 1 day of modification time.
Okay.
So +0 means more than 0 when you do integer division for number of days. So if it's within the last, if it's less than 1 day ago, then it is -1, or exactly 0. If it's more than a day ago, then it's +0. So somewhat clear, buddy? Anything?
That's mine.
Okay. And then there's also the exec down at the bottom, which you can, for example, if you need to find a particular file name or whatever other criteria you choose, and make sure that it's world readable, then you can do something. You can do a construct like the one at the bottom. A couple of points. The double brace is where find will fill in the file names that it found. So if it finds foo something, it'll do chmod 644 foo something where those braces are. And whatever command you put in has to be terminated by a /semicolon. That's for find to know where to stop running the commands. I believe there's another way of terminating the command, but I don't recall it from my head. That's the one I commonly use.
The other way is plus.
Plus. Thank you. The other one is plus. Exactly. Which, of course, leads us. No, oh wait, did I? No, I did not. Which, of course, leads us inevitably to the fact that all your base are in fact belong to us. All right. The next one up on our hit list, and this is the last command, and we're going to get into the bash specific stuff itself, is xargs. Xargs takes a stream out of standard in and constructs a command from it. So, for example, cat a list of files and pipe it to xargs grep -h pattern will tell you what will grep for that pattern in all of the files listed in that file. The -H argument to grep makes sure to prepend the file name to whatever it finds. The old school way of doing that is always putting in def null in your argument list, because that way you're grepping in at least one or at least 2 files, and so grep will automatically prepend the file name. And so logically, it's basically the same as grepping a file or grepping for the pattern in all of those files. And it's more efficient than doing the find, because find is execing grep every time it finds a file.
That's what I was going to say. xargs expands it to the maximum block command.
Right, as he said, the xargs expands the list to the maximum allowed command size. All right.
Go back one slide.
Sure.
Interesting to note the difference between find and ls minus capital R of a pattern when you're trying to list up a bunch of files and stuff.
Well, the find doesn't, with ls minus capital R, so what's the comparison between find and ls minus capital R? I'll spend a couple of minutes on this, but not long. The ls minus capital R to ls is recursive. It will recursively list the directory, whatever directory you give it. If you specify a pattern after that, you actually have to, what's that?
I was talking about like with a regular blob pattern.
Yeah, you'd have to specify a blocked pattern that would actually would actually match any file anywhere in that system. Find foo in the directory will look through foo, or will look through the directory and find every file that has foo in it, or every file name. So ls minus R, you'd almost have to pipe it through grep to get out what you want. -n is handy when you have only a certain number of arguments allowed for a command. So host, for example, is very finicky about what it takes. It will take the name of a host, it will take the name of a host and another name of a host, but beyond that, it doesn't play well. So if I'm catting a list of hosts, piping it to xargs minus xargs host, if I just did xargs host, it would do host all the hosts in that file. And the host command would just primitive bar find. -n1 means just do it once for each of these things, exactly once each time. Another very useful one is the minus capital I. Minus capital I allows you to specify a string for interpolation, basically. This, you tell it where you want the arguments that you're passing it. So a great example is this. If I want to copy them to /somewhere, then I just do minus I them, and then it'll plug in the file names where it sees them and copy them in. Likewise, if I use find with it, for example, I can find everything in active more than 30 days old and move them into /archive. And it's an example. If you're going to make the safety point, I'm going to make that the net.
But if you use -I with anything, it automatically invokes -n1, so you lose the benefit of grouping stuff together. So if you run...
Is that true? Really?
Yes. So to do that with the move command, you use the move, to get rid of the -I, you do move -t/archive, and then the move command specifically gives you the ability to
Okay.
destination.
Good to know. I didn't know that. So he was saying that with minus capital I, it automatically implies minus N1, so it would only do them one at a time. Did not know that. Thank you. If you are going to use like find pipe to xargs, these two options you desperately need. The print 0 and on find and -0 on xargs. Print 0 for find, so you just do find blah 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 minus print 0 means that it will separate each file that it finds with a null character. -0 to xargs means don't break your incoming arguments on space, break them on null characters. So otherwise, if you have files with white space embedded in them, bad things can happen. So if you're going to be doing this, I very strongly recommend that, especially that construct. All right.
And a lot of the other commands have the similar options for their output. Grep has one if you're just listing files.
Okay. Yeah, so you're saying that other commands also have null-related options. All right.
Before you go,
Yeah.
I want to write that down.
Oh. So man find and man xargs, yes.
As long as you're going to point out safety tips, I'd also point out you probably want bin rm -- so that no file name doesn't get a dash about you.
Very good point. So he's saying the suggestion is as long as we're on the subject of safety, I would point out that I was at the end of the line at that point, but as long as we're on the subject of safety, you should use bin rm -- that way if some joker has created a file called -rs*, which can be done, you're not he says, yes.
Do you know if it's more efficient to actually do that than use the -delete option to find?
The question is, do I know if it's more efficient to do this rather than using the -delete option to find? I suspect this is more efficient because you're not using the -I, so it's not in one, so it should construct the maximum amount, versus -delete, which if you're doing a find, is executed on every time. Well, of course, it's probably also like unlinking it inside, so yeah, it's hard to say.
-delete is faster.
-delete is faster, yes.
I was going to ask a similar question comparing this to just using -exec, having fun.
I would almost certainly believe it was better than my -exec, because that does exec and external binary. All right, we're going to need to move on. So now that we've gone over a couple of commands, we're going to examine some of the ways that in the shell you can get things, put things together into new commands, for example. Yes?
Where's the rest of the writing?
All questions must be submitted in TriLUG. All right. So let's say that we want to do something cool on a bunch of hosts. This I see when I'm shoulder surfing, and it stands my teeth on end because people will just type in SSH host 1, SSH host 2, blah, 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 over and over again. Yeah. So that's a little more work than I want to do. So the first thing that we're going to do is just run it once and then muck about with our history. All right, so the first thing we're going to look at is history editing. Yes?
Why would you use the history command with this? Why wouldn't you just use dash, the distributed shell, to run on all of them?
Because this is a bash class.
After class, if you really wanted the K-Shell 93 version.
The back of the room. Okay, now, so default key bindings for command line editing are Emacs, but we should change that to the one true editor. Yes, except minus OVI. I run the command on the first host, hit escape, get in command mode, K goes up, W skips a word, change word, host 2, enter, and then that is the next, and then down there at the bottom is what gets executed. Do that over and over and over again, and you'll get all your hosts done. There's also FC, which is fix command. You do that, it opens your editor with the last command that you ran in it. Whatever you change that to while you're in your editor, and then since you're going to be in BI, right click it, it will then execute that command, whatever you have turned it into, and it bear no resemblance to the original. There are more options to FC, which I actually learned about while cooking up this presentation. Hit the man page. Whoops. All right. Next. Do quick substitution. So I run the first command again, and then I can just do a substitute. So the up arrow 1, and that's caret, not control anything. So up arrow 1, up arrow 2, with an optional up arrow at the end, and it will replace the 1 with the 2 and execute host 2, SSH host 2. If you're not appending anything to the resulting command, you don't have to put the last caret on. So it's optional if you're not trying to append anything. There's another version of that, which is more similar to like Perl VI and whatnot. Bang bang, which reruns the previous command. :s/1/2 does exactly the same thing. Substitutes in 1, it substitutes 2. And the trailing slash is again optional unless you need to put something after the command. Now, why would I do that? Because it's a lot more typing. Well, what you can do is run the history command, which tells you what you've done. See when you did the SSH host 1, because this is like an hour later. Oh, it's command 124. Okay, so I do bang 124, which re-executes that command. :s host 1, a new host, and boom, it just executes that command. Which is really handy if you've got an extremely long command line that you're redoing and you just want to substitute one little piece. All right, so that's good. All of this is very handy and I use it quite frequently, but it's still a little bit of manual typing. So how do we do this so that it's less typing for me? Well, Bash has loops. Bash has loops, so we've got a while loop. So while something true, do something else, right? And then control C to get out of it. Unless you're testing for input, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, there's also a for loop. So for item in some list, do something. And so it'll iterate through the list and do whatever it finds. All right, so now that looked like kind of what we've been doing, is iterating through a list of hosts. So a for loops list is just a list broken on white space, which can be entries in a file, which new lines and everything. So the $parent is roughly equivalent to the backticks, so it just shows up a little better on the screen. I generally use it more these days, but you're basically counting your list of hosts, and for each white space delimited item it finds in there, it'll run the body of the loop. So running on host 1, running on host 2, and it'll do the SSH for you. All right, so that's good, but I don't want to type all that in every time I want to do this either. I am lazy. So what do I do if I want to be able to execute this with a lot less typing every single time? Aliases is the first answer to that question. So what is exactly a bash alias? An alias is essentially a string that is substituted for another string that if it appears as the beginning of a simple command. So our example here is seifu, all right? So now if I run seifu, it will replace that with echo $foo. And at first, the $foo variable isn't actually set. So when I do say foo, it's essentially echo nothing, and it just echoes echoes a new line. I set it to bar, say foo again, and it shows bar. One thing I would like to point out is the type command. I kind of snuck it in there. If you have something, if you have something that you're going to use as a command and you want to know what exactly that's going to do if you type it without actually typing it, this can be handy. Do type whatever you're thinking of, and it will tell you what it is, whether it's a function, an alias, a hash command, what have you. And so that will tell you what exactly would run if you ran that as a command. All right, so this seems kind of handy. One thing that you should know is that aliases are only expanded once. Now, I'm going to explain what I mean by that. I can do alias A equals B, alias B equals C, alias C equals D, and then finally alias Z equals echo foo, and when I type A, it will echo foo. However, if any of those point back to an earlier one, as soon as it hits the other one, it breaks out of that. So you don't do an infinite recursion. So if I do an alias of ls to minus capital AFC, which I do, I can do ls/foo, and it's exactly the same as if I had just typed ls minus AFC/foo without that alias present. So it saves me a bit of typing. All right, so you're going to have to trust me that that's the loop that I put in there before, unless you want to read through it real quick. When I do, I just alias it to that single quoted string, then I do type, it will tell me do cool stuff is alias to blah, 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 okay? All right, so if I run it, do cool stuff, and it just runs and runs and runs and runs. And if I add this to my bash RC, every time I come in, I can use that command whenever I want to. Whoops. All right, so that's good. That's handy, but it's not really all that expandable. So let's improve on that a little bit. Bash also has functions. Functions are a bit better than the aliases. We'll get into why. All right, so let's go ahead and translate our alias into a function. Nicely spaced. Now, I'm going to change the echo so that I know what it is I'm doing. And yes, you can define functions right on the command line and aliases right on the command line and then immediately use them. It won't stay between shells, but you can just define them on the fly. All right, so it's essentially the same thing. It's just in function form rather than alias form. And so when I run it, nothing happens. Well, okay. So it turns out that aliases are expanded before functions, so it really doesn't matter that I've got this function because I've still got the damn alias hanging around. So when I, again, type tells me what it's doing, it says do cool stuff as an alias, so I can undo an alias by unalias. So I unalias do cool stuff, and now it does what it's supposed to do. It tells me that it's a function, and when I run it, I get the right string after that, and presumably is the right thing back in. All right. So what are some of the reasons that we would want to use functions rather than aliases? One point is command line arguments, right? So with an alias, it is simple string substitution, right? It takes the name of the alias and just expands it to whatever the literal string was you set that alias to. With functions, you can actually take positional parameters and do all of the things that you can do with positional parameters inside. So for example, we've got $number, which is the number of arguments that were passed to the current function. Yes, there are more meanings than that. Man bash is your friend. If it's more than 0, if there are arguments basically, then I just turn the hosts into the list of those arguments. Otherwise, I turn the hosts into the list of whatever comes out of cat list of hosts, the same way it was before. And so then I just iterate, instead of iterating over the list of, or the cat, I iterate over the array that I just created and do something on each of those. So what that means is I can do cool stuff on just host 1 and host 4, or I can just do cool stuff and it does exactly the way what it was before. Okay? Another benefit of functions Aliases, again, are straight string substitution. They don't have to parse to anything. With that, with functions, there will be a little bit of syntax checking when you actually define it, all right? And I kind of had to play around with this until I found one that worked. I know that syntax checking works, but in a lot of cases, it doesn't come up for a point I'll get to in just a second. All right, so if I define a function, I do, echo not okay because there's no semicolon there. For when I'm doing a for loop, if I put the do and done on their own lines, I don't use a semicolon at the end of the preceded line. But when it's all together like that, you need a semicolon between the command and the done, and I didn't put one there. So when I try to define this function, I get the syntax error down below, and when I do type that syntax joke, it's not found. It was never defined. So that's one thing. It doesn't always catch everything though, because for one thing, you've got, it doesn't check to see that everything you put in was a command, because it could be expanding another function, it may not have it on the current system. I don't even know why the design, but anyway, so I can put, I can define that when I run it. It echoes the first, but it tries to do this with a argument list that is not a command and fails. So I'm kind of flying through this. Questions so far? Questions, comments? The audience has gone strangely silent. So, all right. Another handy thing about functions is output redirection. So I'm going to segue just a little bit into Bash's output redirection. So one of the things that got me to switch from the C shell family of shells to Bash was its file handle.
Presence of functions?
What's that?
The presence of functions?
That was a big one, yes. But another one is its handling of file handles, because trying to divide your streams in C shell is hellish. But in Bash, it's really easy. So I can do a list of our log and redirect the standard out into a list of log files. I can redirect rep's standard error into dev null, so I don't have to see it, although there was somebody pointed out the -s option, which also silences it.
By the way, he said lack of function, but I got a bunch of C shell functions going on here.
You have my sympathies. So or I can do both, which is the ampersand redirect into output and errors. That puts both of them in there, which can also be constructed as the below, which is redirect standard out there and then duplicate or redirect the standard error onto standard out. So I can actually make that a part of my function definition. So I've defined a function here that has some standard error, or has a guaranteed standard error, unless you've got a weird file system layout. And so I redirect the here and there out, or the standard out to here and there dot out, the standard error to here and there dot error. And when I run it, I don't get any output, but when I cap the output, I get this goes to standard out. When I cap the error, I get the LS. So, and that comes along for the ride as a function.
Back up one slide.
Yep.
Is that last line correct with 2 and greater 1, or should that be 2 greater and 1?
So, excellent question. I call that on this the first time that I gave this class. The question was, that last line isn't correct. Is it 2 and greater than 1, or 2, or should it be 2 greater than and 1? The answer is it can be either. Yes. And I didn't know that answer the first time I was asked it. I prefer this one because reasons, you know. Exactly. But they are both.
The greater than ampersand one, greater than the address of one is a K-shellism.
Ah, the point was that greater than ampersand one would be a K-shellism, more than a Bashism. I've seen it both ways.
And instead of saying redirect standard error to standard out, what you're doing is you're saying redirect standard error to the place where the first descriptor is now going.
Good point.
Which
So,
is that file.
right.
So K-shell had it right.
What's that?
K-shell had it right.
We'll give them that.
Do I have to say it on camera? So the point was that it's not necessarily specifically redirecting standard out to standard error. It's redirecting standard error, or vice versa. It's redirecting standard error to the place where standard out is now going. Is that more or less what you said?
Yeah.
Could you do the other?
Can you do the other?
Redirect standard error to whatever is previously.
You would have to. The question is, could you do the other way? Could you redirect standard error to standard out first and then redirect standard out? Yes. You'd have to do it in reverse. You'd have to fiddle with the arguments.
Isn't there a do where we can,
There is a file descriptor do.
like a name hyper file or something?
Yeah, and I don't know enough about it to go into any sort of detail other than yes, it exists. File descriptor duplication was or duping was the question. Right. Anybody, any other questions?
You covered the other direction of the less than.
I did not, no.
Because basically, there are a lot of times where less than will work in place of something like.
Yes, so his point is that the redirection works with less than as well as greater than. It redirects standard in into something so that you can, instead of cap something pipe blah, you can just use blah less than whatever you want to cap. So yes, good point.
Don't forget the quintessential greater greater.
Yes, greater will append to whatever it is you're pointing to. All right. So we're coming close to the end. We've got, I kind of sailed through a little bit of that a little bit faster than I thought it was. But I will go over some of the things that I did skip through. We've got a little bit more time so I can go into a bit more detail. One of them is arrays. So I kind of mentioned that Bash has arrays. And as of, I believe, Bash version 4, we also have associative arrays in Bash, although you have to do, you have to actually declare -A your array to do it. You can't just assign something a key. But in my experience, it's a crapshoot what version of Bash you're going to end up with, because you're logging into a host that hasn't been rebooted since 2005 or something. So these have been around for a very long time, numerically indexed arrays. So the list is it's assigned just like any other variable, a parenthetic expression, twice space delimited. To index into the array, you encase it in braces. You encase it in braces with a square bracket index. The braces are required. You can't omit them. You can't unfurl them like that. Bash's syntax is a lot pinkier than probably whatnot. Which also goes for encasing the results of the command and parentheses and getting a list out of it. It's zero. It's zero starts at 0. Indexes starts at 0. So host 3 would be host 4 out of the 5. And hosts, that construct at the end tells you the number of entries in your array. So $bracket number hosts tells you the number of, or tells you the last index of your array. Questions on that so far?
So these are one indexed?
0 indexed.
Oh, okay.
0.
Interesting usage there where you've got a command with the $paren versus backward old usage.
Yes, $paren. So I use $parens more than I use backwards these days. I think they're almost entirely equivalent. I don't believe there's anything major that one has that the other does not.
Yes, $.
Yeah. Okay. Good point. Yeah, you can nest the $parens.
They're POSIX.
What's that?
POSIX.
I think they're both POSIX.
I don't think they're equivalent POSIX.
Oh, okay. Well, they may or may not be equivalent POSIX. I don't know. I mostly use them because it's a lot more visible. It's easier to see what's going on.
Or we're taking it back, take looking awful lot like
They-
staring code for 2 hours.
Right. His point is the forward ticking and back tick look an awful lot alike after you've been staring at code for a couple hours. Another one is conditionals. Obviously, we have them. Conditionals in Bash, you can use the double square brackets like I have, single square brackets. There are differences in their usage I highly recommend reading the man page. There are gotchas waiting there. One thing to point out is the string comparison is done with an equals. The numeric is done with minus GE or minus EQ or minus LE, all those. So it's kind of the reverse of some of the things that you're used to. Yep.
If you don't want to bother with the differences between single brackets and double brackets, just default to using double, and things will work a lot more like you'd expect.
Yes.
Great
point.
That'll actually run in any POSIX shell.
So the point is use double brackets instead of single brackets because things will more likely work the way that you're expecting them to. Generally, when I use single brackets, it's if I'm not sure where my script is going. The single bracket has been around a lot long. It's a Bourne shell, so it dates back a long ways. But I generally use double brackets for that.
And then there's always the test.
Yeah, there's test.
So that actually brings up another point, that any shell script you write should not just start with commands. The very first line should always say, have a shebang, which is bang,
Pound bang. Yep.
Because if you don't, it's just a text file and it can be interpreted by whatever shell they happen to have.
Right. His point is that the first line in your file should be, you shouldn't just start with commands. You should start with shebang, which is hash bang, path to bash, or user bin env bash, however you want to do it, and then start your commands. And that way, when Unix looks up the magic number of your file, it knows which interpreter to run rather than the default of whatever happens to be set at the end of the ring. Okay. All right. So, what should you do to start incorporating this stuff? Look through your histories. Okay. I'll do this periodically. I'll do it for like a week on end. Just spend 15 to 20 minutes looking through my history every morning, looking for stuff that I'm doing that I can make into an alias or function. What stuff do you do on a regular basis that you could turn into an alias or a function? Take something, play with it, put it in your bash RC, tune it a little bit until you're happy with it, and then do it again. I find my bash RC is enormous. I've got aliases and functions for stuff that is just incredibly handy, and I find that I have commands that are compositions of stuff that I use constantly that saves me untold numbers of keystrokes, which, as I mentioned, I'm lazy, which is a big thing for me. So, but yeah, just put it in your bash RC. One thing, I can already hear the question rolling around in somebody's head. The question would be something along the lines of put it in your .bash_profile or put it in your .bash_rc. All right. Bash profile, that's .bash_profile. If you have that in your home directory, that will be executed every time you log in with a login shell, a specific quote-unquote capital L login shell. What is a login shell? It's a shell that meets certain criteria. It's executed this way or that way or whatever. You really rarely need to worry about it, except when it comes to which of your startup files are running. The bash RC is executed when you're not doing a login shell. So what I generally do is I have a bash profile that is one line. If my bash RC is there, source it, and that's it. And the rest of the time I just use the bash RC. Yeah.
I recommend, at least as an exercise, to put an echo bash RC and echo bash profile in those two files and live with that for a couple of days, and then you will know when they get called.
Good point.
So you type make once and you go build some very large thing, and you'll realize your bash RC is interpreted 1,000,000 times.
Good point.
During that make cycle.
So his point is he recommends putting an echo in both bash RC and bash profile, and then seeing how many times each one of them gets executed during the course of the day. So, yeah, good point. All right.
So I've got an interesting concept here. If you've got multiple users and you want them to share the same bash RC, there's a quick little construct to create a profile.p/scripts.
Okay.
Like if you've got applications that are being installed and you want the same kind of live have documents and stuff, all, something like that. If anybody wants to see anything, I can show you this.
Okay, cool. As an example of multi-user bash.
Point out one thing too, if you're really interested in writing shell scripts, there's a guy named Mendel Cooper who's written a really good online book. And it's about the best bash programming book that I found. And it's online, you can just download it for free.
Okay, so you said that if you're really interested in getting into bash scripting, there's somebody by the name of Mendel Cooper, who has written an excellent free book that's downloadable online. So Mendel Cooper, I don't know the spelling of that, but could you send it out to the mailing list?
We'll do that.
Okay, cool. We'll send it out to the TriLUG distribution list.
And if you just want tools, we could cool shell scripts.
Yeah, that's the book, Wicked Cool. Okay, yeah, so another recommendation is the Wicked Cool Shell Scripts book, for Wicked Cool bash scripts, for good tools in that book. All right, thank you very much for your time. I've got a page of references here in a second, but I just wanted to pause for a second. Thanks for coming out. Thank you for participating. I enjoyed doing it. So, when you go read the man page, the aliases, functions, redirection, conditional expressions are good sections to kind of go over the material that we went through and some of the things that we skipped tonight. If you've got log on Pilot, take a look at my bash RC, it's open. So take a look in there, pilfer, peruse, take whatever you like. And then this slide deck is up on GitHub under the bash class, my bash class repo, as well as sample code that basically outlines a lot of the stuff that I had up here tonight, guys.
At this point, you might as well just open up a man page for bash.
On the screen.
And then there's also the my.env repo, which is my environment. It's where I keep all of my dot files. So I just clone into a directory, I run a function that I have that sets it all up for me, and I'm all set to go whenever I got onto a new host. So it's all open, feel free. Yeah, yes.
Sort of speaking of the bash man page, does anybody happen to have a good hack or something for when you man some command and it turns out to be one of the thousands of bash built-ins that are all documented in that thing, how to actually be put in the right place rather than having to rep through for a 2-word string that appears in all these different places?
So the question is if you're...
The word built in. Search for the word built in, or in all caps, there'll be a heading. It'll take you down to that section.
So,
And the help command will actually give you help on built-ins. So you say help ls and it's your built-in.
So the question was, if you've got a bash built-in that you're wondering about, you open up the bash man page, how do you get to the information on that built-in without having to scroll down or rep through for something that appears to happen at any time? The point was made that you can look for built-ins all in caps. It is a heading, much like aliases, functions, redirections, and you can, so you will jump right down to the bash built-in functions. The other point that was made was you can type help, whatever, and it will get that command. Yes?
I'm gonna post them on GitHub too, similar. I got it's shell curses ported over to bash.
Okay, cool. So he's gonna post something on.
Doing cursor manipulated strings.
So you're gonna post that to the TriLUG list?
Yeah.
Cool. So watch for another GitHub link on the list. Yeah. Questions, comments? Drop through. Yes.
My favorite bash trick, Control R. Yes.
Just started wrong. Control R, what is that?
Searches your history. You hit Control R, start typing,
and the command that matches what you're typing in your history comes back up.
Do you know if that's specific to the Emacs key bindings, or if it happens, if it works on any of the?
That's a
Emacs.
That's a Emacs key binding. Okay, so with Emacs key binding, in effect.
I just did a set dash OVI and tried it, it works too.
Oh, it does?
It works on mine also.
All right, great. So Control R, start typing, and it will go back to the command.
Then we're remembering your command history numbers.
Right.
I was about to say also, bang matching string will also go for.
Yes, you can bang match but that's the trigger as well. Yes, Bill.
But if you do Control R and you start typing, it shows you the command before you run it. You can edit it. Or you can hit Control R again and it'll go back to the previous one, or Control R 3 times and it'll go back. And you can just search back through your history really quickly.
Yeah.
There are lots of keystrokes. This is an Emacs one, but escape dot will take the last item off the previous command and paste it into your current command. So if you're operating on a single file and you're grepping on it, and then you want to chmod it, or you want to chmod it and then group it, you can use escape dot to paste that file.
Excellent. There's no way I'm going to be able to repeat that. But good. I hope everybody heard that.
Just to round it out, if you are in VI mode as God intended, the slash and question mark search modes are all there with all their accompanying keys. The visual cues aren't as good because there's no cursive UI, but you can use question mark to search back through history. You can use capital N and lowercase n.
Right. Yeah. So the point is that if you're in VI mode on command line, you can still do question mark slash and all that other good stuff that you used to in VI. You just don't get the full screen curses.
Or we've got the EX and VI codes.
What's that? Yeah. You can get EX and VI. Yes.
Do you want to mention alias chaining?
What's that?
Alias chaining.
Alias chaining, as in alias one thing that goes to another chain.
Yeah.
So
it's a gotcha.
What's that?
It's kind of a gotcha.
Yeah, well, I kind of mentioned that when I was talking about alias expansion, that if you alias A, B, B, C, 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 I'm missing what you're saying.
If you alias to a string which ends in a blank, that will then cause it to pick up the next character, next field in your command and treat it as an alias as well.
Oh, there's a good one.
So, yeah, unless you're not expecting it. Unless you're not expecting it.
No, that's, good gotcha, I think is what I meant. So the point was, if you alias something, check me on this, if you alias something to a string that ends in a space, when it expands that alias, it will take whatever else you put on as an alias, or it'll treat that as if it were an alias. It'll try to expand it like an alias as well. So if you do foo space bar, and foo is an alias to something that ends in a space, and it will also try to expand bar as well. That's interesting. I didn't know that.
I believe that's because the alias is only going to expand the first word that you type.
Yes.
And then after you've done that expansion, it'll do the first word again, unless that.
No, it does the next word.
Unless it was a space.
Yeah, if there was a space, then it'll do the next word, and if there's a space at the end of that alias, then it'll do the next one, and it just keeps on going until it runs into a string that doesn't have a space at the end.
Interesting.
So, functions.
Functions are really good. Yes.
I got one question about that. Has anybody ever found a useful
Give me some time until the workshop.
As long as you know it, as long as you expect it, it works. It's really nice.
Yeah, I can see it.
This isn't specifically a bash thing, it's a command, but ACP, advanced copy, it's copy but with a progress bar. So it shows, instead of you not knowing whether copy is stuck on a big file or just ends, it shows you where you're at.
Okay, so
there's also an advanced move.
There's also what?
Advanced move as well.
Okay, so there are commands advanced CP and A and B that are basically CP and B but with progress bars and show you progress as it's going. Any other questions, comments? All right. So, yeah, thank you very much. And as a reminder, we're heading out to Bada Wings after this for the monthly TriLUG So anybody who wants to come along and socialize, please feel free to.
Don't forget the follow-up workshop tonight's seminar stuff is on September 6th over at Slacksmith.
Yes. Just in case that wasn't, you didn't hear it, that the BASH workshop, we've got a follow-up to this, will be on September 6th. Last space is there, and yes, I will be there.
It's going to be a co-workshop.
Yeah, co-workshop with the Durham. Thank you.
And I'm on fire. Meet up right now.
Are we good?